what's your like planning process like? How in depth are your outlines? And do you kind of treat them as very rigid, or do you see them as kind of like a guide, but if something goes off on a wild tangent, you're going to go with the tangent?
Yeah, exactly that. I started with my first few books. I had a very, very, very outline plan. So there might be a sentence per chapter to have the basic structure of the plot. I write in short chapters. My books are relatively short, the right length for their genre, about 50 to 60,000 words. Chapters are about 1,500 words each, and each chapter is a little episode. And so that kind of plotting, where you say, well, this happens in this chapter, this happens in this chapter, that is a perfectly fine way to plot. As I've gone forward, I've actually started plotting in a little bit more detail. So this, for example, is a page that I've just been writing up from my current book. So you can see there's a couple of paragraphs for each chapter. And then before I write that chapter, and sometimes a little bit in advance, I scribble on extra details. You can see different notes have been added on there. And where I think, oh yes, well, that needs to go in there as well, that detail, or that needs to change or something. And then before I sit down to write each chapter, and sometimes the night before, I will write, this is my next notebook. So then here, for example, this is fleshing out the paragraph, sort of building on the couple of paragraphs there. So that's about a page and a half of notes. And then I sit down to write it. A chapter will be about the equivalent of 6 or 7 pages of that size. I'll write by hand. So it'll be about 6 or 7 pages, which will come out to sort of 12, 14, 1,500 words. My outlining will change as I go along. So originally there were going to be 25 chapters in this book. This morning I wrote chapter 29. There are about 6 or 7 more chapters to come. So it's sort of embryonic. It evolves as I'm writing it. And so I write by hand, and then I type it up. At the moment, my daughter, who's on her gap year, she's typing it up for me, which is wonderful. And then when I get to so this is the first draft of a typescript, and you can see I've got scribbles all over the place where I'm changing the language, getting rid of superfluous words, adding in some details sometimes. Sometimes I'll add in quite a lot of detail. So for that page, having changed that much already, that is a little bit to go into where the asterisk was marked. So it does change quite substantially at typescript stage. And then I'll probably go over it through the whole thing, about another 4 or 5 times, making successively fewer edits until it's got to the point where it needs to be seen by somebody else. And then it goes off to my editor.
How long do you spend working on a book then, between like writing that first draft and then like going through the printed out version with a pen and then sending it to your editor?
Okay. From starting to write, it will probably take me about a month and a half to write the first draft. And I'm writing every day. And when I'm in writing mode, I'm not writing every day of every year, but it's kind of all or nothing, once I've got going, I've got to get it out, I've got to get it done. And writing a chapter a day is doable, it's realistic. I can do that in an hour or 2 first thing in the morning. And then I step back from it, so I've got more thinking time before I get back to write the next chapter. I wouldn't want to write any faster than that. I think I'd lose some of the process then. So that will take about 6 weeks to write, and then I probably spend about the same amount of time again on the editing process, because it's quite laborious. I do some editing on screen, but I also I'll probably do the second edit on screen, but I also find it really important to print it off, because when you see it on the printed page in writing, you see it slightly fresher, and you see things that you would have missed on screen. I also, at a certain point, you can see I've printed it out as a double page spread there, sort of book shape, but it's not spaced. It's double spaced there for ease of editing. But a little bit further down the line, I'll format it and print it out as it's going to look on the printed page in the book eventually, because that also helps and also makes it seem more real and gives me that sense of urgency to get the damn thing finished as well, because I can see it turning into the actual book that's going to be published eventually.
Yeah, and it helps your brain to see it differently when you do that then as well, because sometimes you do need to change from looking at it on a screen, see it on a tablet or on the printed page, and change the font and change the background, and all these things kind of trick your brain into reading it as if it's something completely new.
Yeah, and as if it's written by somebody else as well, I think. So at one point also I will read it on my Kindle, because that always makes it feel like it's been written by somebody else. I don't know why. But that's another way of getting a bit of distance, so that you're seeing what you have written and not what you remember writing.
Yeah, I often read mine on my iPad, and I change the background so that it's black or grey, because I don't work on a black or grey screen. And then I change the font so that it's in a sans serif font, like the default Apple font, which I think is San Francisco. Because I write in Palatino, so I'm immediately reading it differently. And then on the final read, I'll usually put it in something like Georgia, because then you'll kind of notice if the apostrophe is pointing the wrong way.
Yes.
And also because that's what a lot of books are printed in, so it gives you that feel for it being, you know, an actual proper book. Why am I using air quotes to say proper? It is a proper book.